Now, what are the things we got wrong? I mean, just a short list. Um, One, the rhetoric around whether or not the vaccine could halt transmission was incorrect and misleading. Uh, Number two, in the randomized control trials that led to vaccine approval, we could have explicitly tested whether or not the vaccine slowed or halted transmission. We did not do so. Number three, we started really well with older, unimmune people, but we quickly made the mistake of extrapolating our vaccine advice to people who had already had and recovered from COVID-19, an extrapolation that lacked evidence, an extrapolation that sort of ran counter to a longstanding medical tradition of thinking that having had and recovered from a disease does confer some sort of durable immunity, particularly against the severe manifestations of that disease. So we extrapolated that advice incorrectly. Number four, we pushed this in younger and younger populations, often using the brute force of the state and the schools to mandate this, even into populations where the risk and benefit balance were more tenuous and uncertain. What am I? Number five, we started to discover safety signals. In other words, there were harms of this vaccine. The governments were reluctant to admit those harms. They delayed interrogating those harms, and they failed to act upon those harms. And those harms did not fall equally across the age distribution. In many cases, those harms fell disproportionately among the people with the least to gain, the youngest people. One of those harms is inflammation of the heart, myocarditis. That's a harm that particularly affects young men between the ages of 16 and 22. The risk of that was massive. The Israeli experience, which we can talk about, where the first estimates were what, 1 in 3,000, and the second dose of vaccine of the mRNA vaccines. That risk of myocarditis far exceeded the potential benefit of those doses on severe disease. So in other words, that's a roundabout way of saying I'm fairly confident for some populations, we actually started to inflict a net harm on these groups of people by recommending and mandating dose after dose after dose. And then the last thing is children. I think the evidence is quite weak, particularly children who have had COVID-19. And then finally, the benefits of a annual or biannual perpetual vaccine policy, which is in the United States right now. We have essentially at least once a year, possibly every 2 times a year in certain age groups, vaccination for COVID-19 in perpetuity till the end of time. What's the evidence for that? And so this paper, which is a very lengthy policy paper, about 22 pages, talks about all of this stuff. And then one last point I want to make. It talks about all this stuff, but the last point I want to make is we should talk about the initial vaccine approval. It came out after the election. Why did it come out after the election, not before the election, when Trump was saying it was going to come before the election? Was that based on science or was that based on politics? And I think that's the first most provocative part of this paper. And I think that's your listeners might find that interesting.